Well, welcome everyone to our conversation on the future of seminary. We are joined today by Dr. Albert Mohler. We are so excited to have him to really just think about what have we learned during this time of the coronavirus and COVID-19, and how is that going to take us into the future as we prepare the next generation of ministry leaders. I'm Holly Tate. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Vanderbloemen, and I'm going to hand it over to William Vanderbloemen, our founder and CEO, who's going to take the conversation from here with Dr. Mohler. So take it away, William.
Thanks, Holly, and thank you, Dr. Mohler, for making time for us. I know you have more than a few things going on, but we're really blessed. We had prompting to buy a website. Those of you who know me at all know that I have if there's a deep dark habit, it is I buy too many web domains, and so we bought reopeningschool.com, and we've been talking about the secondary level and what do you do with cafeterias, and then the college level, where can internet work alongside or in tandem with a residential program. And now on the seminary front, Dr. Mohler, you've been in your position as president of Southern Seminary for quite a while now and have seen a lot of change. Just to frame the context of what things were like when you started, you showed me a magazine cover before we got going. I don't want to put you on the spot, but frame up when you started and what you had to face right when you started before we get into where we're headed right now.
Well, thank you, William. I came into this office in 1993. Historically, I like to think of the fact that I entered this office the same time Bill Clinton entered the Oval Office, and one of us is still here. That says something about 27 years of history here. When I first arrived in 93, what was required was a reformation of the institution theologically. And thankfully, the institution was established in 1859, exactly where it ought to be. So the task was taking it right back to those convictions and to making clear we were a confessional theological institution that served the Southern Baptist Convention. But that required a revolution. And I learned more about leadership in that crucible than anything else in life. And at the same time, 1993 is before we used any kind of internet vocabulary. I realized that amongst the military it existed, but it was not a part of the business, much less the educational vocabulary. But we began to see the potential there. And in 1995, we actually launched the online program. So this is the magazine from 1995. And it says the future of theological education. And there it is in the fall of 95. It looked pretty radical. And quite frankly, if you look at that website right now, it looks pretty embarrassing. It looks like two sixth graders put it together, but it was state of the art for 1995. So I'm very proud of the fact that we've been a pioneer in learning how to do online learning. We had no idea that at one point that would be the only viable platform for us to be able to teach our students in the midst of a coronavirus crisis.
Yeah, so fast forwarding 27 years and jumping right in, you're right back to the same challenge of reinventing. And I want to dive into some topics pretty head on. I know you released about a 3,000 word article that went to your board, kind of outlining what you see. Now, I want to say, watching you, irrespective of where we have a broad theological spectrum that tunes into us for tactical help, irrespective of where you are theologically, Dr. Mohler has been of more than a few steps ahead from a strategy and vision standpoint. And I think if I remember right, you guys were on track for your largest on-campus enrollment this next year, like ever, right?
Right. We were right at the peak of online enrollment, and all our dorms and apartments full. And so I like to think of ourselves, you try to find some analogy. I think we were like an airline fully deployed in the air, and the big player, and all of a sudden the planes got grounded. But thankfully, again, that online reality means we're not out of business, and we've never been out of business. But it's been a huge impact. And the big questions right now have to do for all higher education institutions. The big questions have to do with on-campus enrollment, economics in the future.
So what did you recommend to your board?
Well, two things, I guess, just to get to a fast bottom line. One is that this pandemic represents the nexus of crises that include what is going to be, by any estimation, a very significant economic recession. which is going to suppress every revenue stream imaginable. It's going to suppress endowment income for institutions blessed enough to have an endowment. It's going to suppress donor support in annual giving and major projects. And it's going to put stress on families and all of higher education, with very, very rare exceptions. It's just industry-wide, incredibly dependent upon tuition and fees. And so the slightest suppression there has massive immediate budget effects. And so I went to the board and said, look, we need to factor that in with the best knowledge we have in this budget cycle. And that the board approved that budget on the 20th of April. And the second thing was, we need to lower the cost to our students because they're going to be under even greater stress. And so that's the radical nature of what we did, was to try to cut the budget. We were successful in cutting the budget to a figure that we determined, and lower tuition at the same time.
But you didn't just lower the budget by 2 or 3%.
No, 30%. 30%. Now, you know, a budget is a statement of discipline, and it's a planning document. So if indeed we are able to have a more robust fall enrollment on campus, and if other financial sources are stronger than we project, then obviously we have the budgetary mechanism to raise that. But, you know, I'll just tell you, I've learned in almost 30 years, in fact, I have been an executive CEO for over 30 years here and as a newspaper editor. One of the things I learned is I want to set my organization up for good news where possible, not bad news.
That's good.
And so, look, I understand, and I'm very sympathetic with CEOs and presidents who are kind of waiting for what they anticipate is going to be really, really bad news in order for their boards and for their organizations to understand the need for rather radical change. I just kind of staked my life on not waiting for that, but being ahead of it where possible.
So if I'm a seminary president or a college president or even a principal at a school right now, and I'm thinking, I can see it, we're going to have to make the cuts. I don't know how to get there with my board. I mean, you get 27 years of tenure, so that helps. But what advice would you give to leaders that are having to guide their boards to a really hard conclusion?
Yeah, you know, I call one of the things I do with both internal constituencies and external constituencies, I just call it the blank sheet of paper. I get a blank sheet of paper and say, let's project in a responsible way the revenue that upon which we're going to depend for the next budget year. And if you start with something other than a blank sheet of paper, then you're starting with experience. But experience doesn't necessarily help you at all in the midst of a crisis. And so I did that blank sheet of paper with myself, many renditions, and then took it to my senior staff, with whom I have the great honor of working, and then took it to our financial board, or the board of trustees, and then to the board. Now, conceptually, I did it with the board because that was the end of the process. You know, there is no way that any responsible person could come up with, say, 95% of fiscal year 2019, 2020 income. Okay, we couldn't come up with 90%. Now, we could imagine miracles and pray for them, frankly, but you don't budget expecting the virus to disappear or a vaccine to suddenly appear in August. You've got to budget on what is going to be actual. And I am trying to avoid, all my life, I've tried to avoid a crash. I don't want an institutional crash. I don't want to have to pick up the pieces. I want to lead in such a way, to the best of my ability, to hold the mission of the school and its effective work together. And that's what previous leaders in this school have done since 1859, through Civil War and pandemic and 2 world wars and a Great Depression. So this is what we're called to do now.
And 30% is not, well, let's reuse paper clips and let's just freeze expense account. I mean, that's people, right? So
it's people. You know, a lot of it's easy to understand in a model of higher education. So if you take what in higher education most people call like the E&G budget, educational in general, that's separate from auxiliaries. Then that's where your faculty and your instructional programs are. But then there's a vast area in most institutions of auxiliary enterprises and other institutional activity. Well, without a robust on-campus enrollment, a lot of that just disappears. I mean, it's not even a strategy. It's just a fact. A lot of that just disappears. Those meals aren't being served in the cafeteria. Those events aren't being held. And so an institution our size has built an awful lot of our institutional momentum on highly prized events. But those events are not happening in person. We're still attempting to do many of them online, but that's a fractional retention of program. So when you look at 30%, a lot of that is just activity that has ceased for some time. In order to preserve, here's what's key, in order to preserve the educational program, which is what we're here for. So for example, in that 30%, we had to reduce 9 faculty positions, but 45 administrative positions. Okay, so that tells you where the priority was, is to preserve the teaching program of the seminary and the college. That's hard. It's just very, very hard. But it wasn't a question of if it was going to happen, it was a question of when. And William, I'll tell you the other reason why I wanted to act earlier is it gives me options to try to help transition for people that I wouldn't have if it comes too late.
We feel the same way. We made budget adjustments. I mean, if churches aren't meeting, then they aren't hiring. If they aren't hiring, they're not hiring us. So, we just had to face the news and say, I do believe that on the far side of this, whatever the far side is, whether it's a year from now or the far side of it's going to see a huge spiritual resurgence. And that's just my take on things. We're not meant to be alone. So I think we'll see a huge surge in work for us. But I would rather face the proposition of having to have too few people to pull off all the work than have too many people and not have the work and then have a really bad situation. But I'm still learning how to deliver bad news to staffs and constituents. What have you learned over the years, and what have you put to work in the last 2 months that I might not know at a younger age?
I think your instinct is right. Just knowing you, it's to communicate, and that's why, for instance, I don't want anyone wondering, well, what was the board considering? I put that 3,000 word white paper out for the entire world to see. Mailed it with a letter to all of our major donors. Sent it to all our constituencies. So at least you can see this. This is something I learned really early on as a leader. It's the same reason why Bill Gates put out that massive white paper, for his stakeholders just recently, and why just about every corporate CEO of a Fortune 500 or especially a Fortune 250, they're putting this out and they say, here's how we're thinking. Don't wonder how we're thinking. And so the most important thing I could say from a leadership perspective is communicate and get as much before your people as possible. It doesn't make the bad news any less bad. It doesn't make the coronavirus any less threatening. But, one of the temptations of leadership, and I think, William, this is particularly true amongst Christians. One of the temptations of leadership is to try to delay reality and talking about reality. And so I guess one of the frustrations I've had is that I've had so many presidents call me and say, I think you're exactly right, but they're not saying any of that out loud. Now, I understand each has got his own leadership challenge, but I will err by saying things out loud because I welcome and look, we could be seeing something in error, but you won't know until people point it out. But by and large, I've had people coast to coast say, I think that's fundamentally right. They're just having to figure out how to apply what they're seeing to their own institutions.
Well, let's move toward, I'd say pivot, but I'm tired of it. I'm tired of unprecedented, and I'm tired of new norms. So let's avoid those terms.
Okay.
But let's talk a little bit about the fall. And we're recording today on May 5th at 12:15 Central, and that means at 12:16 Central on May 5th, this will be old news. But right here and now, what are you thinking the fall looks like at Southern Seminary, and what do you think it looks like in the larger landscape for higher education?
Well, our determination here is that if anyone has, a full on-campus program, it's going to be Southern Seminary and Boyce College. But I don't want to say that as bravado. I don't want to be misunderstood, because more than anything else, we're going to do what is safe for students and right. And I'm concerned with the witness before the world of the institution that I lead, the seminary and the college. I want to make certain that we are seen to be acting responsibly by a watching world. And so I think there will be some kind of on-campus enrollment and activity in the fall. But every time I hear a government leader, whether it be coming from the White House or from the State House, in every case, it's basically the same thing, which is we need to open things up. And yes, we should be back, whatever back means, by summer or fall. But then you look at the documents they put out. And for instance, just in the state of Kentucky today, guidelines sent down about opening up. Well, it's like opening the lid on the coffee can, when I was growing up. It's not opening up. So, if you're looking at social distancing and, that's really the biggest thing. If personal proximity is, as we have every reason to believe it will be, a factor, then higher education's in residential higher education is in a very difficult position because proximity is our business. That's what on-campus means. On-campus means proximity. As you know, William, the big challenge here is that for higher education, the business model crashes without a robust fall on-campus enrollment. And this is true especially for 18 to 22-year-olds, but sure. Beyond that. And so that's the reason why you see the Wall Street Journal and others running, stories about all the billions in higher education that will disappear in the fall, and the weakness of the industry. So I want you to hear me say I sympathize with every other institutional president, but I want to answer your question honestly. With following your new vocabulary rules, which I appreciate, no pivot or unprecedented or et cetera. But what that means is we're having to negotiate this responsibly day by day in anticipation. And we're stuck in a very difficult position, which I'm just going to, again, I say things out loud. We're stuck in a very difficult position of needing to say to parents and to students, to families, you can trust us and you should expect to be here in the fall. And we're going to have to do, this is the other part, we're going to have to do what's responsible. And to be honest, right now we have to plan on what we know, but every week we seem to be in a new reality.
I'm old enough, you might remember this. It was a brand new praise song. It was "Thy Word is a lamp unto my feet."
Absolutely.
And yeah. I mean, that's old school. Our younger people dropped off the call. That's right. Yeah. So I loved that song, and I had, as a young seminarian, in my mind, like xenon headlights that could see 3 miles ahead for a car.
Yeah.
And that's just not what the Bible says at all.
No, it's enough to take the next step, isn't
That's
it?
Right. That's right.
And we're gonna seek to do that responsibly. And let me tell you, the good news is higher education. Let me speak of Christian higher education. It has some of the most remarkable leaders as a sector. I am very thankful for colleagues who have enormous ability and a lot of conviction and courage. And they're going to do the very best they can. And boards, oh my goodness, boards didn't sign up for this, but this is their responsibility. But this is why you have governing boards, and
that's right.
They're just massively needed. But boy, do they need to get engaged.
Yes. Well, as we think forward to the fall, I saw this morning here in Houston, Rice University, which tends to be very careful.
Right.
And if you know Houston at all, it is situated next to the largest medical center in the world.
Right.
So like if there are any Dr. Fauci's running around, we have 100 of them here. So and Rice is right next to them. So I was expecting to hear we're going to cancel the fall or we're going to do all online or whatever. They actually said this morning, we're going to be on campus. If you have some form of, I don't want to say comorbid, but some pre-existing condition like asthma or whatever, and you want to defer your freshman enrollment to the next spring, that's fine.
Right.
And we're going to compress our fall semester. There's going to be no fall break. We're going to go to Thanksgiving, and then we're leaving to get away for the winter. And we're going to say that at a minimum, 50% of our education is still going to be in the dorm room online. So I don't know if that's just crazy thinking, but are you hearing things like that?
I don't think that's crazy thinking. I think that's May 2020 thinking. And Rice is a prestigious institution that can afford the very best leadership. So, and their board is made up of some of the most important corporate leaders in America. And so, no, I trust that that's a very good plan for May of 2020. But I want you to think about what we just said, however. And by the way, Rice has the financial power to basically handle a bad semester or a bad year. The bigger problem are the institutions that don't have the financial resources to handle
the smaller, lovely Christian colleges like Judson in Chicagoland. I mean, I'm not picking on them. There's no insider knowledge of it, but a place like that has been hit hard already.
Absolutely. Right. Well, that gets to a bigger picture. But if I could just say one more thing about Rice, but when you think about it, it comes down to the fact that, okay, that's Rice's plan. And let me say, I respect that plan. And a part of our planning is something like that. Okay. But here's the problem. Unanswered is the question, how many families and students want to come to a situation in which you are on campus, but there isn't going to be the on-campus activity that students identify with a college experience. And if I heard you right, half of the instruction is still going to take place with a student in a dorm, not in a classroom. And a part of the problem of higher education that people don't want to talk about is, okay, so here's the good news. Evidently, it is great news. Evidently, this virus is not a dire threat to most young people aged 18 to 22. That's very good news. Here's the other news. They're not being taught by people 18 to 22.
Oh, yeah.
And so you've got the fact that you've got faculty right now, and in almost any mature institution, at least a third of the faculty is going to be in that age, and actually it's going to be more than that, are going to be in the age risk group. Well, how do you get them in the classroom? And is it wise? Is it even medically possible? And they say, well, okay, then maybe we'll welcome, faculty 54 and under, back to the campus and the classroom. Well, all I'm saying is I don't want to drone on here. It's just that even in what you said to me as a plan is not much of a plan yet.
I couldn't agree more. I do love Rice. They do have the wherewithal to see this through. It's a totally different situation. But my father-in-law is a professor there, and he's 70, and he's got a pre-existing condition, and I don't want him going in there if he doesn't need to. And so
I'm 60, and evidently to be 60 is a pre-existing condition.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, so when we get to the fall, what do you do to the parents who, okay, we're doing this for Jesus. This is for higher education so that Christ can perfect his church. I get that. I don't want to minimize that, but there is a business side to this. And you guys are looking to secure commitments for the fall. So what are you doing, or what are you instructing your team to do to the parent that writes in and says, this isn't going to be the same experience we signed up for? What's the difference in tuition going to be?
Well, we're in a unique position here because our tuition's so low, and we just lowered it. So, we're basically right now, our tuition at the college is so below the industry standard. It's about $12,500 a year just for tuition. Wow. And we're going to deliver. Tuition means, by the way, and you know this, the word tuition means the cost of teaching. We're going to deliver the teaching. The rest, then again, if the student's not using the housing, we're not going to charge them for the housing. If they're not in the cafeteria, we're not going to charge them for the cafeteria. And so the bigger problem are for the universities that have these massive and colleges, these massive student programs, and we've got a lot. But students feel robbed when they don't have that. And the other problem is there are a lot of institutions that haven't been at online learning for 25 years. And so what they actually mean is some kind of cobbled together online program. And that's tough. By the way, let me say, I believe that 18 to 22-year-olds, just sociologically, are going to look for on-campus higher education as a norm. I'm confident of that on the other side of this pandemic.
Absolutely, more than ever, I think.
Yeah.
You know, you look at the creation narrative and how God set things up, and he issues benediction after benediction. He made the light, and he said, "This is good." He made the animals. He said, "He made us." He said, "It's very good." The first malediction, the first curse in Scripture that I read is God saying, "You know, it's not good.
Right.
Not good for you to be alone."
Right.
So, yeah.
Young adults need that sociological context to be catapulted into successful adulthood.
And I would I'll push back on you a little bit. I would argue that the tuition, the instruction, is not all in the classroom, and that if you had to price just like we've got a sophomore, now junior, I guess, this week at Baylor, and she's downstairs, and they've done a pretty remarkable job during the middle of this, but it has been cobbled together, and they don't know what they're doing, and they're making it up as they go. And I would say that if you had given me the price point of the experience we've had, it would not be the same as I want you on campus. I want you in and around your teachers.
No doubt. No doubt. I would say in defense of these institutions, in which I hear parents and students saying some of those things, you know, if you want Baylor to exist on the other side of this as a strong institution, then you can't require it to crash in 2020, 2021.
That's
and
good.
Expect that it's going to be there when you need it in 2022.
That's good. And unlike other CCCU schools or IACE schools, they actually have quite a bit of athletic revenue that they're not going to see. Most small Christian colleges, it's not an issue, but the president there's been very transparent with us as paying parents about what the costs are, and it's back to that communicate piece. I think Christian leaders are always looking to share good news because we're evangelists, but I don't think anybody out there would feel like you're a bad leader if you have to share the bad news right now to save.
No, and look, context is very important here. If this were a crisis, like say a hurricane, like Katrina, that hit Tulane and New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and so many, Loyola in New Orleans. And you can say, well, there are those schools. The sector is one thing, but those schools are being uniquely affected. And this is not that. The entire sector. We're talking about a worldwide pandemic. And it's not just the educational sector, it's every other sector. And so, but the sectors aren't evenly affected. So if you look right now, it's a horrible time to own a hotel. It's a horrible time to be a major stockholder in an airline, which is why Warren Buffett just got rid of every holding he had in the major airlines. It's a bad time to be holding stock in a college or university or a theological seminary. But that stock is cultural. It's not just economic. And for Christian institutions, that stock is theological. And so the theological stock, the fidelity of the institution is a more important stewardship than anything else. But then, yes, that financial stewardship, we've got to act as well as we can, lead as well as we can to make sure that as many institutions, faithful institutions as possible, can survive this to fight another day and thrive on the other side. Not because, as a Christian, we primarily believe in any of these institutions. It's because we believe in the gospel, and we believe in the church, and we believe in the need of the church for a generation of young Christians ready to bear bold witness to Christ and to be Christian in every dimension of their lives. And as president of a theological seminary, we've got 300,000 churches in the United States, and every single one of them needs a pastor.
That's right.
And those pastors need to be taught, and they need to be, to use the old word, learned.
Yes, and a lot of them are getting battlefield promotions right now.
That's right. That's right.
Getting, people say, "Oh, William, your phone must not be ringing at all." Well, not really true. So large churches have put off hiring subordinate staff.
Right.
But churches that don't have a lead pastor right now are hey, this is not the time. Let's get serious about finding somebody. So
William, this is your business, but in higher education, we kind of share the terrain here. I'll simply say that my experience from having gone through a massive theological reformation in the whole Southern Baptist Convention, generational transition, and the recession of 2008, 2009, my experience is that on the other side of this, there's an enormous leadership transition.
Yes.
I'm expecting that there will be an inordinate number of retirements, and new opportunities. That it will mean we're going to need more graduates of good Christian colleges. We're going to need more graduates of seminaries.
That's right.
The demand side is going to be very high.
Well, I think that maybe another overused term is this crisis is an accelerator, right? But one of the areas that we've focused on over the years in our firm is, what does succession look like? And we approached it early on because the baby boomers are retiring. I'm 50. There are not many people my age in leadership. There are not many people from really 40 to 55 that are available. There are just fewer births. It was a dip. Right. And then you've got a lot of millennials. So the question is, as this many jobs come available and there are only this many replacements, how do you get this generation ready? And I'm hearing leaders that are 63 or 64 right now saying, I was going to stay in this till I'm 70, but I don't know that I can. I mean, we need somebody younger that can think digitally native, that can think differently and think it without I'm having to translate in my head. I need someone who can. So I think you're going to see quicker successions. I think you're going to see a new kind of faculty. I want to hit pause there and come back to what you think you're going to see. Yeah. I want to talk about curriculum for a minute and then go to personnel, because I've jokingly started a lot of calls with pastor friends and teachers saying, I went to Princeton Seminary and I went to Reformed Seminary, and I'm just so glad I took that class on leading through a pandemic. And everybody laughs, and no one was prepared for this. What have you history? Yeah, well, it is. So, have you all thought at all about what you're going to do in your training in the fall or spring or whenever it happens for pastors that are going to enter this brave new world? Are there new classes, new courses, or approaches that you sense will be happening, or maybe already have thought through?
Yeah, I will say we're not going to have a class on dealing with the pandemic, but what is going to happen is that every class we teach, whether it's theology or church history or the book of Job, Genesis to Revelation, it's all going to be taught against the background of the fact that this is the one thing we all have to talk about. So can I offer you, I'm getting ready to write an article. I'm collecting all these materials right now to write one article very much on my heart and mind. I wrote my doctoral dissertation a couple of generations ago on evangelical responses to Karl Barth. And I raise that only because, Barth was one of the most significant figures in the Protestant world in the 20th century, and in particular during World War II, right. In his opposition to the Nazi regime. But that just reminded me of something else. If you look at whether it's a conservative Lutheran or an Episcopalian on the more liberal side, or it's Presbyterians, and you folks can fall anywhere in that spectrum. You're going to find that every major theological work you read, it's clear that it was written in the context of the Second World War. And I think that's going to be true for just, everything we do. One other thought I want to share with you, and that is that I had the great privilege of knowing the man who was president of Southern Seminary from the early 1950s onward, and he was the president when I came. So Southern Seminary has a remarkable succession, and that but between Duke McCall and I, we now cover, and he came to Southern in the 1920s, so just 100 years of experience between the two of us. And he told me something fascinating. And he said that after World War II, he said, the students who came back who had been fighting in the war were so serious, the seminary had to readjust to the fact that the students who came already understood more about life than before. And their questions were deeper. Their experience was sober. They had fought a war. I think the same thing's going to be true. I think the students who arrive, for instance, you got a 16-year-old right now whose life has been turned upside down. I don't mean you, but someone who has, good. So someone who has a 16-year-old, 16-year-old, his or her worldview is now going to be framed by this pandemic for the rest of that young person's life. They're going to arrive at college hungrier, and I think a bit more serious. And they're certainly going to know a whole lot more about online education than a 16-year-old, just a few years ago. And so I don't want to drone on here, but I think it's going to change the culture on our campuses.
Completely. Even down to, we have 7 kids, so 2 of them are out into their careers and 5 under roof. Yeah, my wife is now a university professor and a high school principal and a middle school principal and an elementary director.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, but our devotions and prayers are different. I mean, the things we're praying for as a family, like end this disease. When did we pray that before? Right. Unless you had it. So my 16-year-old, I remember, and he's smart. He said to me, "So tell me what's this bear market?"
Yeah.
Like, he never had one.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, he's got one now.
Right. There'll be a different gravitas around.
Absolutely.
And I think a different innate desire from students to tell them how to do evangelism more effectively. But because the life and death question has not really been in the fore for people that are millennials. They've had a good, peaceful time. Now it's different.
Well, even at the most basic level of the fact that most people in Western societies believed that we could technologically prevent disaster. And I am very much hoping for a vaccine and a successful therapeutic intervention. But the reality is that we were caught absolutely unable to do what we would do. If there's a flu pandemic, you go and get a shot and, follow basic rules. This is something entirely different. And that's sobering for all of us, whether you're 16 or 60.
Well, and I would think that if I were running a school, I'm going to be teaching for agility like never before. I mean, I think everybody was moving that way because the world's changing faster and faster. But I would think this has accelerated the need to create agility from graduating students.
Yeah, I do want to say one thing here, and first of all, emphatically agree with that. But what helps students to be agile? And I think here's where a lot of modern educators go off the rails. You don't teach agility by teaching agility. You teach agility by giving students an education that is grounded in millennia of human learning and conversation.
Absolutely.
And so they need deeper intellectual resources than ever before. So it reminds me, you'll be someone who remembers Tom Peters, In Search of Excellence, all that. Many years ago, he was, New York Times bestseller. And I remembered him saying that, a part of what made excellence was knowing what excellence was 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
Yes.
Because the companies that are excellent in April may be non-existent in August. You've got to have a much longer, much deeper resource. And then, it also is modeling it, William. And I think the incubus of leadership is more where leaders are leading and less in the classroom saying this is what leadership looks like. I'm not depreciating the classroom, but I'm saying right now, all of life is a laboratory. Every state house, every corporate, context. And yeah, every family. I love the model of your family, just showing what leadership looks like and in your company. So I'm hoping we're learning together in this.
Me too. And I think that you're so right. I remember when I went to Princeton, and I went because the president was evangelical, and it was kind of like going to a cafeteria. We have Luby's here in Texas. And if you go to Luby's and know what's healthy for you, you can get well fed. And if you just take whatever's in front of you, it's bad. That was kind of my seminary experience. And I remember the guy who was not of my conviction in our entering class asking President Gillespie, said, "So what are you doing to teach leading edge theology?" And Dr. Gillespie said, "Well, it's really hard to have a leading edge if you don't have a razor behind it." And
good word.
It's a good word. I almost did my PhD in the history of doctrine, which I think there are only 3 tracks in the whole country that offer that. But I really think the students that will focus on the mega trends of history will be better prepared for agility in the future. And I think that's similar to what you're saying.
One of the things I've done ever since I was a very young man, I wrote my honors thesis at Samford on Elton Trueblood, Quaker theologian, who was an evangelical in his own way, who wrote one time, and he was speaking to young men. This applies to young men and young women. He said, every young man needs a perpetual vision of greatness.
Mm.
There's a reason why there are oil portraits on the walls of my study. William Tyndall behind me, but in the next room, 2 of Winston Churchill. I've tried to learn from leaders. And so you mentioned Tom Gillespie. I spent the better part of a day with Tom Gillespie and I just tried to soak up everything I can about how he does what he does. And when I was elected at president here, one of the first things I did was go to Dallas, and I met with Donald Campbell, who was then the president of Dallas Seminary, and Robert Naylor, who had been the president at Southwestern Seminary, and Dr. Debbie Criswell, who was the president of the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas, and our graduate. I went Los Angeles, California, Chicago. I went wanting just to see what I could learn from other leaders, but I've been watching them at a distance and wanted to talk to them up close. I very much believe in leadership as a failure unless there is a succession of leadership. And so I'm trying to talk about this publicly. That's why I put that entire plan out. Just leaders aren't always right, but they always lead. Yeah. And so this may be wrong in part or in whole. I don't think it is, or I wouldn't put it up. But leaders lead, and so if you can take this and do better, then do better, and tell me how you did better. I'll learn from you.
I was visiting with a pastor of a very, very large church that you'd know not too long ago, and he said, "William, I think I've figured out that I preach for free." And I said, "Well, okay, what do you mean by that?" And he said, "Well, preaching I do and I enjoy it and all, but I think the church pays me my entire salary to make about 4 decisions a year no one else wants to make."
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm wrong.
That's incredibly insightful. Duke McCall, who was that president when I came as a student and lived into his 100th year. I mean, it's an amazing figure. And I got to spend a lot of time with him. And he told me one time, he said, about 350 days a year, president's vastly overpaid. And he said, but 10 days a year, he is vastly underpaid net. In other words, you earn your entire salary. It's not entirely true, but it does graphically illustrate, what he was talking about, because he said there are certain days in which the entire institution comes down to some key decisions, the difference of which will be failure and success.
Yeah. Well, let's jump back to faculty. We talked about a new kind of leader is going to have to be in place. There's going to be more succession than ever. There's going to be a whole new wave of leader coming in. I can't imagine. I mean, on the church side, there's going to be a new profile of what a successful pastor looks like. On the education side, what do you foresee looking for now? Maybe you were already looking for it, but you're looking for it more now. But what do you foresee as a need in seminary or higher education, faculty and administration, key leadership positions that maybe were not as evident before COVID?
Well, I think my response will make sense, but appear non-profound. I will tell you that all of a sudden, the most important guy or a person on the campus is the technology officer.
Yes.
And so there's going to be like a wall of heroes and heroines on the other side of this. And yes, it's going to be medical personnel, absolutely. Frontline, first responders, absolutely. Moms and dads in the home, absolutely. But it's going to be folks who have technical and technological expertise who have made nearly impossible things happen. And so I think a permanent change in this is going to be a shift in resources in most companies and institutions towards more investment in technologies and the ongoing matter of stewardship.
I think even personnel headcount, you're going to have people
absolutely.
Schools that never had digital staff will have digital staff.
Yes, absolutely. I also agree with the fact that there is going to be a ringing out. That's not a profound way of putting it, but there's. So I said earlier, I believe that the norm expectation for 18 to 22-year-olds is going to be the on-campus residential experience. They want They want the whole thing. And I think for good, sound reasons. I think the utility of the undergraduate experience in the United States has proved itself over and over and over again. I'm not sure about anything else. I think when you look at the big three, medical school, law school, and theological, just the three historic professions, I still believe in on-campus education. I still believe in that for the encouragement and formation of Christian pastors, especially. And I'm going to fight for that. But I do not suffer under the illusion that that the on-campus is likely to be the norm going forward the way we thought it would be in the past. There's already experience. Look at MBA programs. They were all residential 25 years ago, and now even in the Ivy League, they're shifting towards online, because
That's right.
beyond the undergraduate 18 to 22-year-old, you are looking at a shifting terrain. Now, even in medical school education, this pandemic is, you can hear it in the conversation. You got medical school deans and others saying, we're going to have to shorten and tighten and be far more innovative in how we're going to train doctors. And now there's a limitation to that. There is a limitation to that. There going to have to be some. I mean, I don't want a doctor that wasn't educated. I don't want an online doctor,
Right?
That is trained just in online medical education. But you could easily see 25% of it migrating online.
Totally.
And that may be an underestimate. And I think field by field, that's going to reshape. And by the way, you have to work backwards from that. Okay, so that means online requires a different kind of faculty, not in quality, but in ability and aptitude. It also requires a different kind of investment, because now your investment's in technology rather than, say, in faculty, or classrooms or campus. So I think one of the big things that's going to happen in the United States is there are going to be a lot of campuses that are going to have to be repurposed.
Yes. And I would imagine you're somewhat of a digital native as a president. If you take over in 93 and in 95, you put out the magazine, but I would bet the presidential search is going to be an entirely different ballgame in the next 10 years.
Yes. And I also, speaking just of theological education, have some specific points that I would make about that.
Sure.
But, the pastor search, every leader search in the Christian world is going to be a bit different. Not in conviction, I pray, and not in heart and courage, but adaptability is going to be a priority, and I don't know how you measure that exactly, but
well, and I hope, and this is probably preacher preaching to the choir, but I hope it's not adaptability at the cost of preparation.
Well, it can't be. It goes back to what I said about the preparing people. You're going to have to give them deeper ballast.
Well,
for them to be able to turn in the water.
Even before COVID, we were seeing and foreseeing a higher need for theologically educated pastors than even 20 years ago. Now that most of America that goes to a Protestant church goes to a non-denominational church, the theological identity of the place is so hard to tease out sometimes. Our job is just exegeting a congregation sometimes. Yeah. So I hope it's not, preparation. We had a question come in asking, so you talk about the technology officer. What about a chief communications officer? And how do you vet for that? Because that's going to be like the White House press secretary now. It's not a middle management job anymore.
Yeah, I want to use this opportunity to ask, and I appreciate that question, but ask everyone participating with us here to look around the world and answer a fundamental question. Who's doing the talking? I think most people in the state barely knew who their governor was. The governor's a daily presence. And we could get into all kinds of things, the White House briefings and all the rest. But the fact is, the most important communications officer is whoever is at the top of the organization in responsibility right now. The issues are so grave that every day is a new fireside chat of one sort or another. Wow. And so I think right now, I mentioned the technology because that has become very apparent to me. Communication skills are just incredibly important, and investment in that personnel is really important. But right now, in the midst of a crisis, the pastor, senior minister, the president, CEO, headmaster is the most important voice. And you really can't put much in anyone else's voice. And that's not because you're the most important person on the planet. It is because people need to hear what they will only hear knowing that the president is engaged, the governor is engaged. I mean, governors have, I mean, look at how the time of the average governor and the schedule of the day has been completely turned upside down. Now, nothing is more important than these briefings that most governors are doing daily. That should tell us something.
Well, I've seen it even in our little company where my staff has said, clear your calendar, be available for these conversations, be available for public communication. Oh, absolutely. So, Dr. Mohler, I want to take a minute before we start to wrap up and ask you, I heard you say fireside chats. We talked about World War II and Karl Barth. You've done some work studying Churchill and a little borrowed from him in a book you've got coming out, Gathering Storm, that really speaks to here and now. And it's not really a pure congruency between the then and the now, but talk to me a little bit about the book that's coming out and point people where they can go for that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate being asked about it. You know, every book is a labor of love. And this is a galley proof. It'll be out in hardback on June the 2nd, excuse me, just in a matter of days now. Its subtitle is Secularism, Culture, and the Church. And yes, I've been fascinated with Churchill and haunted in a sense by him, because as a young man, I was asking the question, why was nobody listening to him? Those wilderness years when he was saying, look at Nazi Germany rearming, look at how many fighter planes they're producing. Look at what Hitler said in Mein Kampf. Is no one paying attention? And that was the whole point of Churchill's leadership, actually, was the fact that he had been honest and seen what others refused to see because they just didn't want they couldn't tolerate the thought of another world war. And of course, it took Churchill to end that war. And so The Gathering Storm is the first volume of Churchill's 6 volumes on the Second World War. And it's really about the world in denial of what was going on, refusing to see the pattern. So dealing with secularism, secularization, culture in the church, just across waterfronts, from the family, higher education, politics, the courts, sexuality, gender, just is connecting the dots is what I'm trying to do here to help Christians to see what's at stake.
Well, as a history of doctrine guy, I would say in a future where everybody says things are so uncertain, the best thing you can do is look backward to try and tell the future. So
absolutely. It's not an accident that William Tyndale's portrait is behind me here. And people have noticed as I'm doing these conversations, the portraits change. Luther, Spurgeon, Augustine, Tyndale. I'm drawing encouragement from them. And and again, historical theology and systematic theology is my academic field. Like you, I want to be a part of a conversation, the right conversation that's gone on amongst Christians for over 2,000 years. Well, and, that gives me hope.
And I think the historical knowledge is going to pay more than ever. I remember when I first started doing search work, it was right when you guys in your part of the kingdom were going through the Reformed resurgence. And I'd talk to mutual friends of ours like J.D. Greer, and he's like, you know who the Alexanders are? I'm like, yes, I studied the Alexanders back at. You know who Hodge was? Like, yes, I know who. So I think it's going to pay higher dividends than ever. And I think going to the Gathering Storm, go to albertmohler.com, and Holly will send out all of these links to you. And to make sure you can take a look backwards so you can see forward a little more clearly. So, Holly, I think you're there. You want to come on and
I'm here.
give us some last minute news and instruction.
Yes. Well, thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. We got great engagement and questions. You can make sure to watch the replay link of this right here on Facebook. You can share it with your friends, but we'll also have a blog recap over at reopeningchurch.com and reopeningschool.com. That's the beauty of seminary, is it's kind of both of that church and school world. So that's reopeningchurch.com and reopeningschool.com. Also, Dr. Mohler and William, you both brought up the very important topic of succession multiple times, which is something that we spend all day, every day here at Vanderbloemen helping Christian institutions think through. So I want to encourage everybody to go to nextpastor.com, where you can order William Vanderbloemen and Warren Bird's book. The updated and expanded edition just came out April 21st. So you can order that there as you and your board start to think through this important topic of succession and what the next generation of leadership for your organization looks like. And then my third resource I want to share with everybody is Dr. Mohler's book that you all just talked about. You can check it out at albertmohler.com as well as gatheringstormbook.com. Thank you so much, Dr. Mohler and William, for sharing your insight today and hosting this really important conversation.
Appreciate it, Holly.
Bye-bye.
And William, it's great to be with you both. And if I could just end on a word of encouragement to the church, support faithful colleges, Christian universities, and Christian seminaries, because the need for them has never been greater. Pray for us. Thank you.
So important. Thank you, Dr. Mohler. Bye-bye.